the fabric of life, the fabric of phenomena is absolutely interconnected, interdependent. So our happiness and suffering happens through and with others. If we are alone, suspended in space, love, suffering will have no meaning. But friendship, love, what would meaning would it have if we were alone in the universe? We are so connected with human beings that the pursuit of selfish happiness, sense of exacerbated self-love will never work. Romain Rolland, the French writer, said if your pursuit of selfish happiness is the only purpose of your life, only goal of your life will soon be goalless.
Matthieu, many blessings to be here with you today, and welcome to Discover More.
Very happy to be with you.
So, as the world's happiest man and one of the most and one of the most well-known Buddhist monks that even Jay Shetty talks a lot about, what is the definition of happiness and how is it different from pleasure?
So, first, thank you so much. It's nice we get that question behind from the start. So, as a disclaimer in the name of all my scientist friends, how we could know the level of happiness of 8 billion human beings. So obviously it doesn't make sense. It's a nice journalistic formula which somehow sticks to me. So it came out after in Madison, Wisconsin, we did some study on neuroscience and meditation. With the long-term meditators who did between 10,000 to 60,000 hours of meditation. And we were more precisely studying compassion. And compassion occurs, unconditional compassion for all sentient beings. And it happens that it increased the level of gamma frequency to a magnitude that was not previously recorded in neuroscience. Not only me, of course, all my colleagues who did the same. It's not a personal thing. It's the result of long-term training. So altruism, compassion, benevolence also somehow related to positive mental states. So anyway, nothing to do with happiness. There's no happiness center in the brain. It's a result of a cluster of many basic human qualities. But some journalists found this story interesting. And, I think it's important to distinguish happiness and define it better. Aristotle says the goal of goals. Everything we do is in the pursuit of happiness, and happiness is a goal in itself. As Aristotle say, and also Buddhists say, because we need to get rid of the suffering and its cause, it will be better to know a little bit what it is, otherwise we are shooting arrows in the dark. So anyway, the first, I think, distinction very clear is the continuum of happiness and pleasant sensation is different. There's nothing wrong with pleasant sensation. Don't get me wrong. To get a hot shower after walking in the snow is fabulous, but 24 hours is not very pleasant. Listening to the most beautiful music is great. 24 hours might be a torture. It was used in Guantanamo to torture people. So pleasure is great, but it changes in nature, becomes neutral or aversive with time. You can feel pleasure while everyone else is suffering around you. And basically, it's more like pursuit of hedonic happiness. It's not a state of way of being. It's a fleeting experience, like a candle that uses it up itself. While if we define happiness as a way of being in the world, that means a cluster of fundamental human qualities like compassion, benevolence, altruistic love, resilience, inner strength, inner freedom, deep sense of serenity, those actually are not vulnerable to time and circumstances. The more you experience it, the more they become deeper, the more they grow, the more they become solid. It's like the platform you are on life. It can go up and down. And you come back to that, even we have joy and sorrows, but is this your baseline? And this can be enhanced because every of those important human qualities, say like compassion or sense of inner strength or inner freedom, can be cultivated as skills. That means you can enhance your basic level of happiness. So that's, I think, the main thing. So if we could say in 2 words, it's an optimal or an exceptionally healthy state of mind that perdures throughout different emotional state, events of life. And it's like the depth of the ocean. There could be calm ocean on the surface or big waves, but the depth of the ocean is always there. So that's a short take on happiness and pleasure.
Of course, I didn't expect you to address the timeless question of the pursuit of happiness, but I do want to go in on compassion that you talked about. And as a psychotherapist, right, as a social scientist myself, I do agree that happiness is a clusters of symptoms or clusters of states. It's not just a singular neurobiological or neurochemical thing. It's just like depression. Depression is a clusters of symptoms. It's not just a single sadness. In your most recent New York Times article interview, Matthieu, with David, you shared with him that Dalai Lama's biggest advice to you after the retreat was meditate with compassion in the middle, and end the meditation with more compassion. So can you talk more about why do you feel like compassion is a key ingredient in the pursuit of happiness?
It's compassion together with wisdom. Those are like the two wings of a bird. And you can't fly just with one wing. You don't train one wing first, the second. Those have to come together. You have to have a correct understanding of reality. And then out of that, you feel boundless love and compassion for those who suffer because of distortion of reality. So now, usually we have four components. There's we call boundless love or benevolence. That is mostly the wish. May all sentient beings find happiness and the cause of happiness. And the cause of happiness is very important, because if we mistake the cause of happiness and we may run towards happiness and actually run towards suffering. And we want happiness badly, and we turn our back on the cause of happiness. Sometimes we are addicted to the cause of suffering. So you see, it opens a whole field of knowing what are the cause of suffering really at different levels, and what are the cause of genuine happiness. Then there is compassion. So it starts with the unconditional love. So now you may say, how you do that with a dictator, a bloody dictator, Bashar al-Assad or Putin and many others we can name. Well, the point is, it's different from a moral judgment. We know very well there are people who are like incredibly obnoxious and harmful, and which are the cause the death of hundreds of thousands of people. But precisely, we may the causes that brought someone like this, the personal causes that make someone become like a completely pitiless psychopath, the cultural environment that brought someone like that in power, may those change. So when you encounter suffering, this unconditional benevolence becomes compassion, which instead of the wish, the general wish, may all beings find happiness and the cause of happiness, you now say, may all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. So basically, compassion is unconditional benevolence applied to suffering. And then the fourth element of compassion is impartiality. Now, you cannot just love your dear ones and your dog, because all sentient beings, without exception, nobody wakes up in the morning thinking, may I suffer the whole day and if possible my whole life. Would like to find happiness. Even people who hate themselves, if we were given the possibility to find some elements of happiness, they will somehow take it. If we take the example of the sun shines on everyone, good and bad, close and far. But if you are very near because of life circumstances, say your companion, your children, your dear ones, they are close, so they get naturally more light, more warm, but not at the cost of discriminating against others. If you were decided, I'm only going as a sun to shine on my dear ones, then the light will be very narrow, not very warm, not very light. So actually you would love less even your loved ones if you have a very shrunk sort of compassion and love. So some people, this is not realistic because there's infinite number of beings. Of course, it's not the question of saying, I'm get up in the morning and I will resolve all the suffering in the world. But at least you can exclude no one from your heart. So in your mind, at least you don't exclude anyone from that wish. May they find happiness and the cause of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. Even the worst dictator, you may wish, may the hatred, the indifference, the cruelty, that in that person's mind may dissipate. So that's the point.
I think wisdom is a really important component that people forget about. Because I think when people think about boundless love or a boundless capacity for love and endless capacity for compassion, people think in a very naive terms. Oh, so you give away your social security numbers, you give away bank information to a stranger as a compassionate act, but that's naivete. You still have to be grounded in realism, right? So I like the highlight of wisdom there.
Yeah, so wisdom is also tuned to reality, is to know that things are impermanent, that things are interconnected. We are not like small snooker balls that sometimes interact and which are independent in nature. The fabric of life, the fabric of phenomena is absolutely interconnected, interdependent. So our happiness and suffering happens through and with others. If we are alone, suspended in space, love, suffering, will have no meaning. But, friendship, love, what would meaning would it have if we were alone in the universe? We are so connected with human beings that the pursuit of selfish happiness, sense of exacerbated self-love will never work. Romain Rolland, the French writer, said if your pursuit of selfish happiness is the only purpose of your life, only goal of your life will soon be goalless. And then the next step for those people is when they finally get that clear in their mind, in their hearts, they look at others and they say, well, even that person is confused deep within. Also, that person, she doesn't want to suffer. So why not be concerned by her fate? Why not wishing that she find happiness? Why not wishing that she find to remedy to the cause of suffering? So, step by step, you can enlarge the scope of those wishes for others to be happy and be free from suffering. This idea of having a boundless aspiration that all beings be happy, it is definitely possible as an aspiration, even you're not going to do it.
My brain is going somewhere weird. Bear with me, Matthieu. I like to make different connections and find the intersection point. So I represent Christian faith, as you know, and I know you view Buddhism as a way of life, right? So in Christian faith, a lot of Christians struggle with this idea that God's grace and forgiveness is for everyone, not just for Christians, for everyone. Just like the rays of sunshine you said, either everyone benefits from the sun or nobody. I would just like to keep this open. Like, do you have any thoughts there, given the underlying theme?
Possibly similar in Buddhism, which is the Buddha nature. We say that every sentient being has the Buddha nature deep within. There's basically an original goodness, not so much original sin, let's say. So we say it's like a nugget of gold. So now that nugget of gold can be buried into rock, can be fallen in the worst garbage, but gold is gold. The gold itself has not been denatured. It's not improved once you have cleaned it. You just reveal what it was. Now, you may ignore that, and then you will say that we are like a beggar who doesn't know that there is a nugget of gold buried under his hut, his shack. So he's rich at the same time and poor at the same time. So therefore, that's why we say that if we could bring the loving kindness and compassion is somehow a reflection of that. If we didn't have that, this boundless love would not come at the surface. And so the whole part of Buddhism is to actualize that treasure that we have within oneself. And so we are not really washing original bad nature, which would be our start, because we say like you can clean a piece of charcoal for 100 years, it's not going to shine like gold. So removing the layers or removing the clouds that prevents us from seeing the sun, but the sun has always been shining in the sky. It's just that it was obscured for a while. So that Buddhist concept makes us also think that there's no one that is intrinsically evil. There could be a lot of evil piled up upon that gold, like a mountain, and quite hard. But nevertheless, it's a bit like what Nelson Mandela said after 30 years in jail about his jailers. He said, if you look deep within, you'll always find something good deep within human beings.
This reminds me of a famous story from Thailand. I think this was maybe 30 years ago, where a lot of archaeologists and people, they're cleaning this famous temple in Thailand, and it was a mud. It was like a mud Buddha statue, pretty big. And once they cleaned it, they realized it was a golden Buddha. But they kept it under the mud. The pursuit of enlightenment, the pursuit of happiness, the pursuit of what is aligned with you is uncovering and revealing what is already within us to begin with.
And you see, also enlightenment is a kind of ultimate perfection. You get rid of all obscurations, all defilements, all mental toxins, all basic ignorance. So you cannot fabricate perfection. You can only uncover it. Perfection is not something you can manufacture with piece and this and that, and buying gadgets and putting them together, and boom, there's perfection. But what you can do, precisely for the goal, is to remove what prevents perfection from shining forth.
Speaking of enlightenment, Matthieu, I read your book, your forthcoming book, The Notebooks of a Wandering Monk. You described enlightenment as a perfect awareness in the book. So can you go a little bit deeper into how you view enlightenment and whether having perfect awareness is actually beneficial for most people? Because I think having heightened, increased awareness comes with burden, if you really think about it sometimes.
Well, it's not awareness in the usual sense. It's not only that, of course. So first of all, as a disclaimer, of course, I'm nothing close to enlightenment, don't get mistaken. But, in the text and receiving so many teachings. So basically, enlightenment is like, first you get a room with light and shadows, and gradually the shadows disappear and there's only light. So light is not like something shining in the dark. It's the light of wisdom, the light of inner freedom. And so wisdom, in a way, when we speak of awareness, it's not just mindfulness, being aware of this and that when you wash the dishes. This is more like ordinary mindfulness, which is great. Awareness is that we aware of your Buddha nature. Pure wisdom is 100% like the center of the sun. There's not a trace of darkness in the center of the sun. Enlightenment is going from being entangled in suffering to be completely free from the cause of suffering, from delusion, deluded perception, or perceiving the world as permanent, or to bridge the gap between appearances and reality, to know that things are impermanent, they appear, yet they are void of intrinsic existence and all that. So it's perfect wisdom. It is completely free from mental toxins like hatred, craving, lack of discernment, pride, arrogance, jealousy. We detail 84,000 of them, the main 5 ones being those. So when you are completely free from those and you have bloomed to the ultimate level, they are opposite. The opposite of hatred is unconditional love. Opposite of lack of discernment is wisdom. Opposite of jealousy is rejoicing. Opposite of pride, humility, all these qualities, and especially the union of wisdom and compassion. So that will be, in short, enlightenment. All the shadows have gone and all the qualities have bloomed.
I love your ability to make relatable and digestible metaphors and analogies. It's very visual. So, Matthieu, in chapter 24, in your forthcoming book, you describe your masters and the enlightened one's ability to read minds and thoughts of others. On countless occasions, due to their perfect awareness, this is going to be a heavy question, so feel free to elaborate and go deep. We're in the heavy waters now, so...
Well, I'm trained as a scientist, and I think one thing I got out of, working 6 years with François Jacob at Pasteur Institute, and also my father, who was a very rigorous intellectual mind, Jean-François Revel, they gave me the taste for rigor. Mm-hmm. So no mess around, no washy-wishy stuff. So I know perfectly well that at the state of knowledge we have now, of functioning of the brain, those things, we have no mechanism, no explanation of that. And I discussed that at length with my neuroscientist friend. I even spoke at the neuroscientific meeting with a few hundreds of them, And I was in dialogue with my friend Wolf Singer, with whom I do the book also at MIT Press, like the Notebooks of a Wandering Monk, called Beyond the Self. But at the same time, I cannot not testify what I've been witness of. That would be not honest. So I'm not trying to convince anyone. I'm totally not in that state of mind. I just said, look, this happened to me. I was not dreaming. And as one of my friends said during that conference, we don't think Matthieu is just telling us a lie, but we are in big trouble if that is correct, because we don't know how to explain that. But just to give you a short example, because no matter how you look at, it's very hard to find any other explanation. So one time I was in my hermitage in Darjeeling in India. So I was living in a 9 foot by 9 foot hermitage, wooden hermitage, without electricity, without water, but the most comfortable years of my life, because I was so much where I wanted to be and near my teacher. So one day, I thought of doing my practice. I remember that I've gone fishing when I was young because my grandmother was going fishing. And one time near the seaside, my uncle had some ponds. And there was some big rats that were eating all the flowers. So he gave me a small rifle and he said, why don't you try to shoot some of those rats? And I was maybe 14 or 13. And I don't know what came in my mind because I never touched a rifle or other that. I went and shot quite far. The rat jumped, and I hope still now that I didn't harm that poor rat, which had done nothing to me. And then, imagine for a fish, if we were taken by a hook, drawn into water, and then they cut our head, we won't find it's a great thing to do. So suddenly all these things came clearly to my mind. You put in the shoes of the others, and I say, how could I have done that? It was mad, inflicting unnecessary suffering to another sentient being. So I say, I must go and see my teacher and sort of confess about that. So I went down from my hermitage, about 200 yards. And I came in the room and he was sitting there. His name was Kangyo Rinpoche. He's a very great Tibetan master. And his son, at that time I didn't speak Tibetan yet. He was interpreting for me through English. So I sort of paid homage, and as I was approaching, Kangyo Rinpoche said something to his son and they both laughed. So anyway, when I came, he asked me directly, how many animals did you kill? So, there was no funny light shining, something in the... It was the most natural thing, almost like a joke. It was teasing me. But nevertheless, that was the question I had in mind. So I said I was just going to speak about that. I said, now, you may say, well, I talked with some of my scientist friends about that. One of them said, well, there's a lot of things happening in life which have no meaning. You meet many people, if you are in a big city, many people in the day, and they have no meaning. Now you meet someone you met in Paris when you were young. So, wow, how come we just meet here by coincidence? It has meaning, but the probability of meeting that person is not lower or higher than meeting anyone else. So he said, when things have meaning, they strike you. But I gave him a counter example. I said, well, once I did a book with a physicist, Trinh Huan Tuan, it's called The Quantum and the Lotus in English. And I was going to a TV show, a book review show, and I walked towards my publisher to pick her up and go to the show. On the way, a taxi stops with a guy came out with a letter with a stamp, and he said, I'm going to post that letter for you. I didn't know that guy. He was simply writing me a letter because of the books. So I said, I give it to you. I'm not posting it. Okay. Serendipity. Then we went to the show. After the show, go to have a drink somewhere. Then hail a taxi to go back. There's a guy in the street. He said, I want to speak to you. I said, where are you going? So let's go to the same place. You can speak in the car. So as we spoke, the taxi driver said, well, you speak about this TV show. 2 hours ago, I picked up a lady who was coming from there. I said, what was her address? And he gave my sister's address. So he had picked up my sister, and now he was picking me 2 years later. I said, how many taxi drivers? 14,000. Okay, well, again, in the same day. Huh? So that's purely like winning the lottery. There's nothing strange. This is a very unlikely event, like winning the lottery. But there's nothing out of this world, because it's normal for a guy to go and post a letter. It's normal for a taxi to take people. It just happened that my sister. So there's nothing extraordinary. It's just a funny coincidence. But no, my teacher telling me that, never ever did he ask me about my childhood. He asked me if I had parents, which I said. I have a very dear uncle. I said I was engaged in some studies when I first met him. He said, better you finish all that before coming to live here. That was in 7 years about my personal life. My mother came there. But besides that, never asked me what I was doing when I was a child. We did like this, did I do that? Never. He always spoke about giving teachings, speaking about, stories of Tibet, of other great masters of the past, telling stories or ordinary conversation of the day. So how come? And if it wasn't that he somehow has read my mind, why in the world would he ask such a weird question? It makes no sense. So it's not like a normal thing to do, like going to post a letter. Why anyone would ask this question out of the blue to someone who never asked about his past at the moment I was going to speak about that? So, I have no other explanation that was the most obvious is this. And not only that, but we have a lot of similar stories. And when Wolfsinger came to Nepal and some of us started to tell the story, he said, stop it. If one of these is true, we are in deep trouble. So I have no explanation except possibly reading the mind. That seems the only way I can imagine. But from the science, it doesn't make sense because the two brains would have to be in the same state to think the same thing at the same time. But at the same time, I cannot say that I didn't witness that. So I leave it as an open question. And my friend Francisco Varela was a great scientist. He was saying about all these things, about the ultimate nature of consciousness. Well, let's leave it open because that's how knowledge can progress. And so far, we don't have explanation, and I don't want to give spooky ones because I don't have one. Simply, it did happen, and I leave you with that. Food for thought.
So, a lot of food for thought, but like I said, just to add on to that, as a psychotherapist, I also prize high emphasis on rigor. Especially now, there's a lot of misinformation, disinformation. But I do want to share my own, opinions about what you shared, reading the book as well. So I believe in synchronicity and serendipity. And as you know, like people's hormones sync. Hormonal energy, they do sync, like menstrual cycles. And a lot of people don't know this, but I did a lot of research where in the 1970s in the United States, there has been documented 3 series of scientific studies documenting telepathy and synchronizations of thoughts and images. So what they did is they put 3 people in 3 separate rooms in a household for this control study, three-part series of scientific studies in the 1970s. They gave one controlled group certain sets of images to think about at night. And over the time of the study, controlled durations, the other 2 people who never communicated with the first person, the control group, had the exact same sets of images in their dreams for the next week. Never conversed, never talked to each other, but their images in their minds synchronized with different people. And a lot of studies have been shown about twinning effects. Twins, people study twins with similar thoughts and content. And I've experienced this with my clients, with my fiance, just out of nowhere, we have the exact same thought at the exact same time. So I just wanted to share that as well.
Wolfsinger also mentioned a study in Stanford, I think in the 70s, commissioned by the US Army, putting people in submarines and trying to communicate like that. And he said, it was not a big sample, but it seems interesting. So personally, all these people, they are mediums who read future. I have any trust in those. But we say that, at least just make it clear, from the perspective of Tibetan Buddhism, precisely when you have inner freedom, boundless compassion, your wisdom increase. But there are a number of capacity that comes with spiritual experience. So normally, this is not something that's happened by accident. Some people are a little bit more gifted and they see. It's really a side effect of spiritual realization. So from our perspective, I will be less convinced until I see some real solid evidence about normal folk having this kind of intuitions. But who knows? Again, we have to keep open, But in Tibetan culture, it's really the result of advanced spiritual practice, and it's more like an extra thing that you are given, like bonus almost.
So, if you don't mind, Matthieu, since we're in the areas wishy-washy, as you called it, in chapter 36, you talk about reincarnation. We're just going to all the heavy waters. So you documented in details your journey to find the reincarnate of a famous teacher, right? Given your intersection with your Buddhist identity and the rigor of your scientist background, how do you explain reincarnation, especially your PhDs in molecular genetics?
Just to begin with an anecdote, once in Berkeley, I was with Paul Ekman and another researcher called Levinson, and they were studying human conflicts. They studied with couples, and they wanted to see if a Buddhist monk can handle or diffuse conflict better. So they put me with two people. One was Professor Glaser. He was a Nobel Prize of Physics. He found the Glaser bubble chamber, and then he studied the brain. And the question was how a scientist-trained person could believe in such stupid thing as reincarnation. So with Professor Glaser, it went very, very well. Of physiology, we were measuring everything in our physiology. We were very calm, and he at the end he said, "Oh, I wish we could have more time to talk." And then without telling the person, they put me with the so-called most difficult person in the campus of Berkeley. So he came in, and I said, "We're supposed to have a conflictual discussion." He said, "No problem with me," he said. And then he went on, boom. And after 10 minutes, they could see the physiology going down, 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 down. He was calming that. And at the end, he said, "I can't fight with this guy. He's always smiling and he gives reasonable answer. And there's something about him that I cannot fight." So now, to be serious, this is a very big cultural divide. As much as this is goofy stuff here in the West, it is common in the culture or in Asia, both in Hinduism, Buddhism, and others. So that's to start with. Now, the real question is, what is the ultimate nature of consciousness? Because if the consciousness is 100% the functioning of the brain, as some neuroscientists postulate, but they all know that they are not there to claim it for sure. And consciousness is the question of the 21st century for neuroscience. If consciousness is 100% the brain, then forget about reincarnation. There's no question. It all stops when your brain goes back to Earth. Now, if it's not the case, then you have a point. And there could be what was consciousness before, what it could be after. So what are the arguments from Buddhism? Well, it somehow goes back to Leibniz's question. Why is there something rather than nothing? You see? So the Buddhist answer is unless you bring God, there's something because God created everything, and where you just have to acknowledge the existence of phenomena. It's sometimes it is the nature of things that the world exists. You don't have to say, why does it exist? It does. You just have, so we call that a primary fact. And if you go back to, atoms and particles and quarks and then quantum vacuum, why it is there? Well, it's there. That's it. So, and then from several, you could be beginning without beginning. That was Bertrand Russell said. There's no logic. It's difficult to imagine beginninglessness, but there's no logical flow. While a first cause, there's a lot of logical flows. Where that cause came from. What was before. How did it become a first cause to start with? Anyway, de novo, creating something from nothing is difficult. There's a Buddhist saying that a million causes cannot make something that does not exist coming to existence, because non-existence is the concept we have of the absence of things, but the concept of the absence of something cannot be a cause. Anyway, so what about consciousness? Similarly, going down to the quarks, the quantum vacuum, and so forth, if you go introspectively to consciousness, you look at your consciousness. First, you see a lot of thoughts, memories, things happening, and by the workings of your mind. Then you go deep within. behind the screen of thought, this pure awareness that allows thoughts, the space of being aware, of being conscious, the basic cognitive faculty. Light itself, light can shine on the heap of garbage, doesn't become dirty. Light shine on a heap of gold, doesn't become expensive. Light is just revealed. So pure knowing doesn't need to have a content. You can be pure awareness without conceptual content, without mental fabrication, just aware, purely aware. Now, if you reach there introspectively, no matter what scientists did, so it is called the first person experience. While the scientists, the third person experience, what happens in your brain, but they don't come to consciousness. And then when I look at pure awareness, I don't come to neurons. I don't even know I have a brain. They told me I have a brain, but I don't feel my brain. So I come to pure awareness, and that's it. I just have to acknowledge. So it's primary fact also. And the Western phenomenologists also agree on that. Consciousness is a primary fact because you cannot go out of consciousness to say, oh, I have a brain. Consciousness is made by this and that. You're already in the space of consciousness. So therefore, in the same way that the world cannot be created from nothing, we say that consciousness cannot just come out like that, boom. It's not just the complexification of life, of neurons and so forth. There's a qualia there. There's not something that is conscious one instant and conscious the next, because that would be a change in nature. So we say that the one instant of consciousness now is triggered by preceding instant of consciousness. So just like the universe, from the Buddhist perspective, it has no beginning and no end. It has constant transformation. So that's the philosophical analysis of the idea of a continuum of consciousness. Now, when we discuss that with neuroscientists like Christoph Koch, who is the head of the Seattle Institute, and I mentioned what would be the facts that, if they were proven true, will go towards saying that consciousness is not just 100% the brain. So there's a number of things like near-death experience, but that's not a very good one. Because so many things can happen when you are in the between life and death, tons of neurotransmitters. A moment becomes a big time. You can imagine all kinds of things, a lot of gamma frequencies. You can have bliss and see all kinds of things, light tunnels of light. This is not, although it's very interesting, and this could be a life-changing experience if you come back, but that doesn't show anything about consciousness. You can see a paradise and all that. It's basically the functioning of your dying brain, and then you come back. Now, the two things that are left is remembering past lives, okay, or mind reading. So remembering past life is tricky. There's a lot of things happening in the world. There's a scholar in Virginia, Ian Stevenson, who studied 200 or 600 cases all over the world, not only in Tibetan. Kids who say, well, I was born there, this is my parents living in that village, my former life, and so forth. So he tried to see, as a sociologist, what was behind that. Mostly 4 or 5 years old boy and girls. And there are many striking stories, like in India, at the time of Gandhi, there's a famous story, which I have no time to tell you, but, who knows? These people telling stories, they could have been briefed by someone. So it is interesting. So Ian Stevenson, after 600 cases, analyzing them, he came with 20 cases, which says pointing toward reincarnation. That means there was no way that the child could know so much detail about a place or other people that's supposed to be there from her parents, and they die young, for instance. And he said the Occam razor is the simplest, is that they did remember something. But, when I discussed that with some scientists like Christoph Koch, I said, well, we don't know how to handle that because there's no mechanism again. They don't say the study was flawed. They said, we don't know. So it's just left like that, and nobody know how to use that. But that's complicated because you see it requires a lot of going around, and as Stevenson did. So mind reading will be the simplest. But the problem is those great masters, who sometimes show that capacity, and we say that they don't show that to impress people. They show that if it's useful to a student. But if you ask them, they say, oh no, I don't know anything about that, because they want to remain humble, and it's not something that you boast about. So it's very unlikely that they will come to a lab just to prove that, and that they thought it will be good for humanity. So therefore, I'm afraid it might remain for a while as an undecided question in terms of proving it.
And also, synchronistic moment. I was literally thinking about consciousness. I had a question about consciousness, and you brought up consciousness, even though I never said the word. And we also call that flow state, right? Group flow, when a group of people can synchronize on a certain wavelength. But I want to add, because I know about that study that you just referenced. I know one of the kids of the 20, she says she was a princess from England, and she was able to disclose, never revealed, never documented, declassified archaeological evidence about like very secret life of the queen and the princess from like hundreds of years ago. And they couldn't, because there was no Google back then, there was no AI. There's no way for her to access such information. And she was 9 years old. So it's unknowable, right?
Well, you know, I've met a few people like that. All those who said they were Egyptian princess and all that. I don't know why they are not, you know, sweepers or something. They're all something very fancy. So I little doubt. Anyway, I mean, one of the most striking cases, if you want to go, is called Shanti Devi. She was a young girl. And in school, she always told her parents that she wants to go to a place called Meerut, which is a few hundred kilometers from Delhi. And she kept on bugging their parents, and they're beating her. And then the teacher at one point said, "No, what happens with this girl? She always wants to go to there." And she was also speak the dialect of that place, which her parents didn't speak. And she was describing, she said, "My husband, I died when we were young, and my husband said he would not remarry, and he kept some money somewhere under the floor, and this and that." And so very, very precise how the house looked like. So finally, Gandhi sent a few people there, elder people, reliable people to see. And they found immediately the place. He gave the names and all that. So they were kind of shocked. You know, she died before her husband. So the husband didn't go, but he sent his brother and saying, "I'm your husband." So he came to Delhi, and the girl immediately said, "You are not my husband, you are my brother. And once you even teased me and all that." So he was freaked out. So he went back, and finally the girl went there. And then on the platform, everyone waiting, and she saw her former grandfather, and she jumped into him, "Oh, grandpa." And she went to the house, and she said, "Here's the place where we had hidden the money for you, and you remarried, and you said you were not." So anyway, it was like that, a big story with a lot of details. My girl, we have absolutely no reason to know all that. So it's one of those things that you go, "Well, you know, what to make about that again?" So I don't know. You know, me, I'm puzzled as a scientist, like anyone should be. But these things did happen in history, and we have to somehow take it into account. And it's somehow anecdotal. You know, science needs to be done in controlled condition where you can repeat it in similar condition, and you have to have a control group and all that. So this is not possible. So it's possibly that science can never, but at the same time, an accumulation of anecdotal evidence, at the end, it starts building up a case. That's the only thing we could say. But anyway, again, I'm not here to convince people. I know it's puzzling, and I myself don't see any explanation other than that. And I'm not into pushing that like anything, but it just happened. So what to do?
It's like the nature, right? So the underlying theme of what you're saying, Matthieu, is the interconnectedness of all of us. Whether you view consciousness as an emerging phenomena or not. Dr. Paul Conti, a famous psychiatrist, describes consciousness as an emerging phenomena. Practically speaking, like, what can we take away about why it's important for us to keep an open mind and respect and almost revere that there are certain parts of life there will never be concrete answers? Because I think we like concreteness, like reductionistic, right? What can we practically take away from what we just said?
Well, never, you know, some people said it's like try to reach the horizon. You know, we never reach because the horizon keeps going further. So when that argument was given, I remember Christoph Kort said, well, you know, in past, many said that about particular scientific questions, and in the end, they were solved. So it's simply to keep an open mind that possibly there would be a way to decide on those questions, and not just, extraterrestrial life, for instance. Nowadays, with all these exoplanets, probably there are millions or if not more of them, there's most likely there's some kind of life somewhere. But I remember, about the SETI project was trying to listening to waves coming from, I don't know, maybe quite optimistic. There was a scientist in Europe say, well, even some green men are in my garden, I will close the window and continue to work. So that's not the attitude we should have. But there's probably some. So let's just keep an open mind to that. We probably discover many more things and many more mechanisms, many more possibilities.
I thought a lot about how to conduct this conversation with you, since you represent so many, just a rich background and so many intersections. But I do want to go into the scientific realm since we're on the train. So I love your Karl Popper quote in your book, "A theory that in principle cannot be refuted, that is unfalsifiable, is not a scientific theory, it's an ideology." Can you elaborate what you shared in chapter 5 about your seemingly conflicting rigor of a scientist and your Buddhism? Because we've been talking about things that are unfalsifiable in a sense.
Well, there was a theory, for instance, which I debunked, not me, but I pulled out all the philosophers who debunked it, about universal selfishness. That's in the Altruism book. And some people say, well, if you look in depth, you will always find a selfish motive, no matter what. But that's unfalsifiable. You cannot falsify that because you can always have an explanation. You gave a fruit to a kid who is asking you for a fruit. Okay. No, it's not altruistic because the kids were bothering you, and then you just give that to keep it quiet. So it's not altruistic. So you can always find an explanation, and it's nothing you can prove. If that theory explains every possible experimental result, you can always find a selfish explanation, and then that's finished because you cannot disprove it. So that's why you need experiments. And that's what, for instance, Daniel Batson did for altruism. Over 25 years or more, he did 35 different kinds of very clever experimental settings, putting people in situation and showing that, yes, there were people who were genuinely altruistic. Even it was not about feeling some self-gratification, or, for instance, if there was a cause for themselves. All these things, when the arguments were given, or maybe this is the selfish explanation, he would find experimental setting and device to put people in such situation that you could eliminate that explanation. And after 30 different settings, he said, well, at the end, this is clear that genuine altruism does exist. We are not all altruistic all the time, but it exists as a state of mind. It's not that we are universally selfish, and that was based on 30 years of experiments. So a theory that you cannot disprove, because always you go to see a psychoanalyst, you are before time, he say you are anxious. You are right on time, he say you are obsessed by perfection, and you are late, so you are avoiding me. So in any case, there's an explanation to prove that the person has a problem. So how can you get out of that?
Yeah, I feel personally attacked as a psychotherapist, but I never said that to my patient.
No, not psychotherapist.
Psychoanalyst?
Psychoanalyst.
Yeah. I do agree that that's like confirmation bias, right? If you have a certain belief, you uphold it, you will find ways to intellectualize it and makes whatever fits your belief system or operating system. I want to go into the similar train, but take a little soft pivot, because with everything you said, Matthieu, I sense underlying humility. Yes, you subscribe to the rigor of your scientific training and evidence and empirical data, while being open-minded and accepting that there is things are unknowable. So in chapter 16, you talk about meeting and learning from the Dalai Lama. You reference his great humility along with your other masters. Despite being the most well-known spiritual teachers of the generation, how do you explain the oxymoron of those who possess the faculty of humility while also being the best at what they do?
Well, there is a beautiful example in Buddhist literature. You say a fruit tree which has no fruit, the branch go proudly towards up to the sky. When there's a lot of fruits, the branch go low because it's heavy with fruits. So humility is a natural expression of wisdom, of knowing the immensity of what is to be known, of knowing that pride is a mental toxins that undermine your own happiness and that of others. Arrogant people are no fun to be around. You don't feel good around them. And then you cannot really feel good within yourself. So humility is a natural understanding that there's so much to learn, and also that pride is a poison. So it's not a fabricated thing; it's a natural thing. And it's true that all my teachers were incredibly humble despite their boundless qualities. I described a meeting of my second teacher, Digo Khyentse Rinpoche, with the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama wanted to receive teaching from him. So he would come almost every year for a week or so to Dalai Lama's residence and offer him teaching. And they were actually who would be lower than the other, They were kind of rivalry, try to sit lower than the other and be more humble. When my teacher would come to the Dalai Lama's porch, he would try to prostrate 3 times on the floor, but he was old and heavy, so he could only once. The Lama had done 3 times in between. And so it was, a wonderful lesson that to see those 2 suns of shining, like 2 suns shining in the room of joy, of wisdom, of kindness, and at the same time so humble. And once 2 great scholars came from Tibet to a monastery in Nepal, and they came to see Khyentse Rinpoche, and he knew them well. And he said, while you are here, why don't you teach for a while at our philosophical college? And one of them said, I know nothing, and also he knows nothing. So he was humble for 2, and the other one was nodding, So we say the water of quality doesn't dwell on the rock of pride. So humility is a natural consequence of spiritual achievement. My teacher would always say, until me excluded, all the teacher were enlightened. And they were all of them were humble.
Going full circle into how we started this conversation with happiness and the core ingredients of happiness, which is compassion and wisdom, I think humility is a prerequisite to achieve wisdom to begin with.
Well, yes, of course. Yes, it is. Because if you think you know everything, why should you learn and work hard?
So, okay. I want to use as a segue into going to the meaning making of this world, because I think our ability to make meaning is also what makes us humans. But I think to make meanings, it also requires humility. So I'm going to ask you this question. In your book, someone asked you about what is the meaning of life, which is one of the biggest philosophical questions, right? Just what is consciousness? And you told them in your book that I'm just grateful that I get to make meaning to my life. Can you elaborate on that?
It's inspired by what the Dalai Lama said. He said, the point is not to find the meaning of life, a big thing, but how can I give meaning to my life? Because the meaning of life is so vast, it's so unprecise. So, of course, Buddhism has some idea how to not to waste your life in distraction, in pursuit of fame, image, and all this stuff that only bring disappointment and disillusion. But to really use your life to progress from ignorance to wisdom, from suffering to the freedom from suffering. So basically to follow the path of transformation that leads to enlightenment. So that's really to have a precious human life and extract the quintessence of human life. And Seneca, the philosopher, said, it's not that we don't have much time, it's that we waste a lot. So giving meaning to time, sometimes people who know they have only 1 year to live and they live that year very fully with their loved ones, appreciating nature, looking at the sky, looking at birds. And they say it was the most rich, fulfilling year I ever lived. Well, we should live every moment like that because we are actually, death is certain, but the time of death is unpredictable. We say, I should feel fortunate to breathe in again when I breathe out. So we should value time, not being obsessed, like frantically, making like as much out of the time, but really appreciating its value and not wasting it to completely useless and meaningless things, preoccupations.
I think I have a question for you that you would appreciate. I want to use this question, take a moment to honor your mother as well. One of my favorite stories in your book is your mom first experienced spiritual teaching from Mother Teresa, and then your master, and decided to make vows to become a nun, even with the family. In response to your mother saying that she has a family, your master asked, if you can guarantee that you will be alive this time next year, then you can wait. It's such a simple yet profound question because life is not guaranteed, like what you just said.
Yes, that's right.
Any thoughts there?
Well, to meditate on impermanence and death is not a morbid thing. It's not, I'm going to die, I'm going to die, so why should I do anything? No, it's to give value to every moment because, if I know I die in 3 days, I'm not going to mend my socks. I'm going to do what is most meaningful. I don't know, practice, think of my teacher, say a bye-bye to many of my wonderful friends. What I can use the time in the most meaningful way. So the idea, people ask me, can you come next year in October? Who knows? We'll be alive. They say, are you sick or something? No, but I can die tomorrow. What are you talking about? So the thing is a bit strange sometimes, but it is like that. So if we think like that, again, it's not morbid. When the death actually comes, you're already familiar with it. It's like almost like a friend, you're not shocked. Oh, I'm going to die. Okay, this is a time it comes and you can be in practice if you are lucid and think of your a contemplative state to cross that threshold. But if you start panicking and say, I should have practiced before better and all that, is too late. So again, it is not to feel into kind of negative attitude. Oh, I'm going to die. Why should I do anything? But to really infuse every moment with the sparkling quality of appreciating and wonder and awe of every moment of life.
Yeah, like memento mori.
Because it may not last for long.
Yeah, I love the impermanence aspect of Buddhism and also Stoic philosophy, memento mori.
And also, that's the nature of things. As one of my Buddhist friends said, it's like the law of gravity. Whether you acknowledge it or not, it's there. So impermanence is the nature of things. You don't have to. It's not a theory or it's not a dogma. This is the way things are. So if you don't recognize it, you get attached to all yourself, your object, your dear one. But if you know there's change is coming, then you don't grasp so intensely. And then you don't suffer so much when things change because they change all the time.
Yeah, change is the only constant. I want to go into your meditation practice. And obviously, you're the expert on meditations as the world's happiest man. You kept up your meditation practice for at least 30 minutes every day since your first trip back from India more than 50 years ago, at least 30 minutes.
More than that, I hope.
So the best I heard about meditation is you meditate to improve the quality of your life, not to master meditation. Can you care to add anything?
I don't know whether that corresponds exactly. For meditation, it's a very vague term in English. Sanskrit word, bhavana, means to cultivate. So you cultivate some qualities, some skills, also some knowledge, the better knowledge of how the nature of mind, how the mind functions. And the Tibetan word, gom, is also to become familiar. So you could be familiar with altruism and compassion. So as you learn, you become familiar with playing the piano. Or it could be become familiar with, again, this pure awareness that lies behind the thoughts, that it's there, but you are not used to see it. So you become start knowing it, become familiar with it. So it's a process. So it's not just stopping and emptying your mind in a mango tree. That doesn't work. The mind will not remain empty anyway. It's a lost cause. And also you should not block thoughts because they will not stop. You can just let it go like a bird through the sky, or you can multiply it. Why did that to me? Why not me? Why me? So that they may chain reaction. But if a thought comes, they will come. So then you let it go and then there's no problem. So all kinds of things, that's part of meditation. So meditation is also about cultivating specific qualities. So training the mind for attention. Without attention, you cannot meditate on compassion. Because if your mind is daydreaming around the world, then you are not meditating on compassion, you are just distracted all the time. So attention or mindfulness is the basic tool. It's not a goal in itself, but it's the tool indispensable to cultivate any other quality, like inner peace, inner freedom, dealing with thought, dealing with emotions, increasing altruism, compassion. You need to be a mind that is stable and calm and focused. Otherwise, what are you going to do if you are distracted all the time? So all those processes are meditation. And so as many kinds of meditation as there are training. If you tell someone, hey, I'm training, then he says, what? Football or ping pong? So that's the same. Meditation is training the mind in different ways. It doesn't need to be, a forcible training. It could be just resting in equanimity, in the nature of mind. But you need to be familiar with that. It doesn't come so naturally to most people. So that's the point. So yes, I've been trying to keep that, hopefully more than 30 minutes a day, like an hour in the morning and the afternoon. And when we do retreats, then it's almost like whole day. And, we get up very early and so more with breaks, but mostly we practice 8, 10, 12 hours a day, but not in a tense, forcible way, in a flowing sort of, there's the concept of flow by Csikszentmihalyi Milai. So I met him a few times. He was a wonderful man. And, the description of flow that it's not too difficult, not too easy, and you enter the flow and it's effortless and you lose the sense of self and you lose the sense of effort and time. So, but usually it's connected with, surf-riding, mountain climbing, being a surgeon or something. So I discussed with him and we agreed that, this profound meditation on awareness is a kind of flow, but without physical activity. Otherwise, most of the criteria for flow and the sense of fulfillment when you do that apply to somehow meditation.
So, yeah, I do know the science of flow pretty well, right? You need to have a certain level of challenge, a little bit of discomfort, and full awareness. You achieve flow state. I have a question for you, Matthieu. I've been asking questions, but I have more questions. Where in the beginning, we talked about the West, especially the United States of America. We have this very oversimplified, fixated versions of what happiness is and this incessant, endless pursuit of happiness, which is more pleasure-like. Similarly, I think a lot of Americans now, after the Beatles popularized meditations in the West, after they brought it back from India, I think a lot of people get caught up in meditate every day optimally, optimizations of your mind so you can get more productive, more efficient. Do you see any, pearls or harm in meditating for the sake of productivity and optimization?
Inevitably, when John Kabat-Zinn, which is a very good friend of mine, and others like, Daniel Goleman, Richard Davidson, all together, 30 or more years ago, they started to, John Kabat-Zinn specifically, the mindfulness-based stress reduction program. You could not possibly bring something called meditation in the clinical world. He was working in Boston. But he clearly, the patients undergoing difficult treatments like chemotherapy and others, as well as the caregivers who are in state of burnout and very stressed, doctors and nurses and so forth. There was a lot of stress, and stress is good when you run away from a rhinoceros, but it's not good when it's chronic and it depletes your immune system and it's bad for the neurons. So stress is good in stressful situation, but not all the time. If the alarm bell rings all the time, it's no good. So there was clearly a problem with stress, and he thought that mindfulness-based stress reduction was a good entrance door. He could not possibly, even he had studied in Burma, and he's not a Buddhist himself, but he certainly drew from Buddhist practice and methods. There was no way to bring up a Buddhist practice. The people would have shouted like anything in the schools or anywhere. But it has to be secular. It's the only way you could have a truck driver, an university professor, and doctors and doing the same thing and following that program. And over 30 years, it tremendous positive effect in the world. When he gave a summary of 30 years of all these interventions in one of the Mind and Life meeting in Phoenix, it was very moving because it's in hospitals in Hong Kong and China and all over the world. So now, yes, it is somehow kind of taking in a nutshell some of the tools taken from Buddhist practice. And it's not embedded in the whole Buddhist path. You're not trying to get enlightened. You're not trying to get boundless compassion, although you become a better human being, hopefully, and you grow more some compassion, but it's not this unlimited goal of enlightenment. It's to be mindful in the present moment. And it's a very, very useful tool for many things. And it has to be secular. So it is by nature also not, again, embedded in a much richer sort of incredible, wonderful system of Buddhist philosophy and practice that is so much faster. So it's just one tool. Nevertheless, it does a lot of good. So at the same time, there's a lot of also possibly misuse of meditation for very petty purposes. And that's personally why I like the notion of, caring mindfulness. I discussed that with John Kabat-Zinn, because you see, a sniper who has been ordered to wait and ambush someone, he's very mindful. He cannot be distracted. He should not be carried away by his emotions. He should be always in the present moment and non-judgmental, because he's going to kill that guy. He doesn't have to say, oh, he's a nice guy after all, I don't want to kill him. That was his job. So you could say he feels some of course it's an exaggeration and it's a caricature, but basically it could fulfill some of the criteria of non-judgmental being in the present moment. But that's not going to lead you to enlightenment. So, but there's no caring psychopaths and no caring snipers, because then they will not shoot someone. So I know it's an extreme example, but if we have caring mindfulness, there's no problem. You won't use that to squeeze people at work so that they give more work in the same time and don't feel too stressed in a completely, pitiless way, because then you will not be caring for their well-being. And so I think, although if the mindfulness best restoration is done by proper instructor and so forth, the component of kindness and compassion does come out, of course. But I think to state it from the start, it will, take away many of those misconceptions and misuse possible. And that's why when I was asked to, lead some mindfulness meditation at the infamous World Economic Forum in Davos, I will do caring mindfulness so that there's no possible confusion about squeezing your employees to get more out of them because they are less stressed.
So it's all about the intention, sounds like.
That's why in Buddhism, intention is absolutely fundamental. When we start something, a meditation or anything, first we check our intention. We cannot always predict the consequences of our actions, even with the best intention. But we can always check our action. Am I doing that only for me to pursue my completely selfish interest, or for others? If I do it also for others, is it for a small number or the larger number? If it's for the larger number, if it's for the short-term benefit or long-term benefit. So ideally, for the greater number, for long-term benefit, you must think and think. So we said the intention colors. Now, if you put a crystal or a glass on the red cloth, it becomes red. If on blue cloth, it becomes blue. So we say the intention is what colors your action. So if your intention is right, the path and the result will be right. If the intention is wrong, you may be very sweet, flattering people, and the only thing you want is to cheat them. If your intention is good, you could be quite rough. A mother that pushes her kids who's going to run her over by a car. No, she's not, it seems brutal. She's pushing it away, but she saved the kid's life. So the action looks brutal, but the intention was to save the life. If you go to an old lady and say sweet word because you want to get her inheritance, the action is kind of nice looking, but the intention is very selfish and mean. So intention is really what matters most.
I love your metaphors. Intention colors your actions, so visual. Do you want to talk about altruism? You brought it up earlier in the conversation, and I know you're very, very big on altruism, humanitarian effort. And I personally always thought that pure, unadulterated, absolute altruism is not possible because there's always a small hint, flavor of self-gratification. There is a famous term in sociology, coined by a social worker. We call it effective altruism. Regardless of self-gratifications, if you're making a positive effect based on your intention, that's all that matters. Care to add anything or, share about your perspective?
Well, effective altruism is a movement that I really think is very important. I know I'm quite good friend with Peter Singer, who wrote a book, The Most Good You Can Do. And basically, we try to apply that in our Karuna Sechen, our humanitarian organization that helps 400,000 people now every year in India, Nepal, and other places. And so the efficient altruism is if you have some time and resources and capacity, how best use it to remove suffering. Are you going to spend $1 million on one person, or are you going to save 10,000 lives in Africa for the same amount of money? So that's the question. Now, altruism is, I think we need to stress its importance as a only concept that can cope with the challenges of the 21st century. Because we are facing a kind of a very difficult, challenge to bring together the short-term needs, mid-term, and very long-term. It wasn't the case when, 10,000 years ago, there was 5 million human beings on Earth. There were hunter-gatherers until they start settling 10,000 years ago. So there was plenty of everything everywhere. There was no competition. So, and the impact they had, already they had some impact about big animals being eliminated, but minor on the planet. So they were not really influencing the fate of future generations. Now, after the Industrial Revolution, the Scientific Revolution, the boom of technology in the 1950s, the great acceleration, we entered the Anthropocene. We became the major force that shapes the fate of future generation and the biodiversity and everything. And we know how we're starting to mess it in a big way. So that's a new challenge. And we don't feel personally responsible because nobody wakes up in the morning thinking I'm going to wreck the planet. But the accumulation of our actions and the increase of population, increase of our power on the environment has led to that unfortunate consequence that we have environmental changes that have never happened in millions of years at such a speed and is clearly the result of human activity. So now how can you put around the same table a mother in Africa who wants to feed their kids in the next week? That's her main preoccupation. A politician or an investor or a social worker who is trying to improve the situation for over the next 10 years at the workplace, or in the transport, in standard of living, in people wanting to fulfill their aspiration to find a happy life and have a good life, and not forgetting the fate of future generation. Otherwise, like as Greta Thunberg said, we are actually traitors to the future generation, and they will say you knew and you did nothing. So now, my favorite Marxist, who is Groucho Marx, he said, Groucho Marx, the Marx brothers, he said, why should I care for future generations? What did they do for me? Well, I heard the American billionaire, which I'm not going to name, saying on Fox News about the rise of the ocean, I find absurd to change my behavior now for something happening in 100 years. Maybe he has no children or grandchildren. So that's typically, okay, forget it. I do what I want. And, they will see, they will manage, they will find something. That's total selfishness. So in the end, the environment question is a question of altruism versus selfishness. So selfishness going to do the job. Otherwise, you'll get, free riders economy, everybody trying to make the most and disconsidering others, including cheating and all that. You'll get total disconsideration for social justice and welfare and all that. And you don't care a damn for future generation because you're not going to be there. So that's not going to work. Once I remember I went with the Bhutanese delegation on this gross national happiness at the United Nations. And I was given 4 minutes to speak about the inner side of happiness. And I basically said, well, a nation that is the most powerful and the richest and where everyone is unhappy, what's the point? No, maybe economists can say, well, compassion is nice, but it's not about economy. But if they say they don't care about poverty in the midst of plenty, they don't care about future generation, no, that discourse doesn't go anymore. Even some people do think that. So I think that's why I think it's such a pragmatic concept. It's not an utopia or a feel-good theory. Cooperation is the only chance of, of getting out of that trouble. And I'm not the only one to say that, of course. Bertrand Russell said that. Kofi Annan said that. Cooperation is the only hope. And cooperation is a positive cooperation where altruistic come together and work together for a better world. So I think that's why I was passionate about spending 5 years solid and documenting and researching this book on altruism, which has 1,600 scientific references. And I got almost a altruism post-traumatic syndrome after finishing it because I worked so hard. And just to write another 800-page book with these notebooks of a wandering monk. So some friends of mine say, can you write a 100-page book for once? But when you're passionate about something, it's difficult to make it too simplistic.
Yeah, not to mention you have published 22 books, which is insane.
I don't know, because I was not very good at school, and my teacher probably know more I like, but I will be quite surprised.
But I wanted to ask you altruism question because I read your epilogue. Yeah,
oh, yes.
Your parting message was about altruism, and then we have to uncover, reveal, and double down on altruistic acts because that is the only hope for the 21st century.
So because it is a practical way and it's not a altruistic, a utopian ideal, we should recognize that selfishness is not going to do the job. Ayn Rand said, in my philosophy, altruism is immoral, evil. And she wrote a book, The Virtue of Selfishness. Sorry, that's not going to take us into a better world. So we need to recognize that there's scientific evidence abundantly that we are more inclined, even though we can become psychopaths, we can commit mass murder, or what's happening now with some dictators, very well in Ukraine and other places. This can happen. But, if you look at young kids, they are more inclined to cooperation and appreciating people who behave well with each other. It's abundantly documented by science. So even though we can become psychopaths and mass murderers, there's a greater tendency to work together, to appreciate altruism, to feel good, the banality of goodness. When we speak of a crapulous crime, hideous crime somewhere, everybody speaks all over the world on the TVs now. But if 100 people in Los Angeles go to help the elders, it's not going to make the evening news because somehow this is more what we are. So we don't see the banality of goodness, and we are polarized on the deviations of heinous behavior because this is frightening. Evolution equipped us to react to potential dangers. You don't congratulate yourself coming out of a train or a plane or a theater saying, well, that's nice. Nobody start fighting on each other because that's what is normal. And if two people fight, then you say, oh, these two guys fight, and you will tell everybody. So we should recognize that. We should recognize that being as social animals, working together, expressing to the best the capacity we have for love, for altruism, for compassion, for caring for each other. As Martin Luther King said, we came on different boats. Now we are all on the same vessel. We should recognize that, and that's the only hope. So we should teach the scientific evidence and this fact in school. We should not be shy of saying that. We are not imposing some weird religious moral values. People resent. People say that schooling should be value neutral. The kids will find their own value, and where they'll find the value? In computer games, when everybody kills each other every 2 seconds, they will find some value, but not the right one. So who can be against altruism, against honesty, against friendship, against being a trustable person? if you say, is there universal value? I remember there was an opinion poll about people below 25 all over the world. And the majority, surprisingly, more than 50% said there are no universal value. Why? Because if you ask a Pakistani if there's universal value, they will think, oh, they are going to bring Western values, or a Chinese will think the same. But if you ask, is honesty a universal value? Is friendship a universal value? Is kindness a universal value? They all say yes. But they don't want to be imposed a system, a moral system of a particular religion, a particular culture. But if those basic values taken individually, of course, we are for it. Who doesn't want kindness? We thirst desperately for kindness. So why should it not be a value that we think is wise cultivating and spreading around? And there's so many benefits. It's crazy. And hatred, you think it's not a universal evil? Who is going to promote hatred as a virtue? It doesn't make sense. So there are states of mind which are detrimental to our happiness and detrimental to others' happiness. Hatred is one of them. Discrimination is one of them. Jealousy, pride are others one. And there are some which contribute to the well-being of everyone, especially kindness. So that's, I think, we should recognize. And then have no fear. But our education is just about solving problems, sharpening your intelligence, and then you become better human being. They say, oh, the family should do that. But now the families have been raised in the same neutral things. They're also lost quite often. So basic human values in a secular way, that's what the Lama speaks about, secular ethics. This is fundamental because we want to become first a good human being so that we thrive in life and also a good person in society, not a nuisance.
No, I think your head is glowing, but that was maybe the shampoo you're using. But I love your optimism and compassion and the seeking the universal values. To go a full circle with your faith in Buddhism, Siddhartha, the boy who became the Buddha, I know he obviously was born into great wealth and he left the city and he saw the poverty, the injustice, the horrible things. And then he concluded that sufferings is originated from desires. What I like to focus on, given your altruism and this emphasis on compassion, he didn't give up and just got depressed and said, oh, I give up. Let me go back to my prince life. He chose to do something about it. And I think that's altruism, extending a part of ourselves in the hopes and compassion of others.
Well, it's a process. When I did The Monk and the Philosopher, that changed I deliberately left Pasteur Institute to go to the mountains, but The Monk and the Philosopher, the first book that brought me back to the West, and was because I'm here, because of The Monk and the Philosopher, I'm here with you today. Otherwise, I would be completely unknown in the Himalayas. It really changed 25 years of maelstrom, which I didn't plan. It just fell upon me. There was someone asked me a questionnaire. He said, "What do you have a regret in life?" They say, one regret I had is I'd really try my best to cultivate compassion, loving kindness to the extent of my capacity. I'm not any stellar meditator, but I try my best. But I could not put it in action hands-on. Pure heart, dirty hands. So The Monk and the Philosopher was either the beginning of my trouble or beginning of an opportunity, because I decided to dedicate 100% of royalties of all my books, conferences, photography, and all that, exhibitions, to these first projects we did without any association. Then we founded Karuna Sechen after a number of years, and now it has branches in the US and everywhere. So this was missing, putting compassion in action. So I'm very glad that thanks to all these new circumstances with the books and conferences and meeting people, not only the books, of course, many people join us, philanthropists. Now we have a wonderful set of benefactors, small and big. So we could save probably a few 100,000 lives and help millions of people. So it's a kind of, I'm happy to have done that, and I can rejoice and dedicate the merit. And it brought me a lot of happiness.
Yeah, my favorite quote from Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., MLK, is everyone is a saint and a sinner. And I think we get to choose what part of ourselves that we want to uphold more by being more compassionate.
Well, I can't remember literally one of his quotes, but it's something like either we will go towards compassion or we will die as stupid and selfish people. It's not exactly the word, but the spirit is like that. And I also love that.
Yeah. I love your grace. I love your optimism, and I love all the work you've done. They're just, I didn't ask you about your photographer stuff, your photos, which is amazing. There's so many parts about you, but I mean this.
Well, that's one of the only thing I'm still doing, besides translation. I focus on translating Buddhist texts from Tibetan to English and French. And photography is my favorite way to distract myself. So I have a project of painting with light, which is actually the definition of photography, photography. So that may give a lot of freedom to improvise things.
Oh, paintings with light. Oh, but...
Well, photography means writing with light.
Oh,
yes.
I didn't know that. Oh, wow, that's cool. But I know a lot of people don't know. Every photos in your books are by you. So I just want to put it out there.
Well, not except I don't do selfies.
Except selfies. But...
Well, I did about 10 photo books. Yes.
And they're amazing. Seriously, they're majestic. They're amazing photos.
Right.
Seriously.
Thank you.
With that being said, Matthieu,
all right,
we're towards the end, and I just want to create an opportunity for people to find you, get your book. Where can people find you? Maybe share your website, your book, and anything you want to share today.
Well, there is a website which has my name. Some friend wanted to do. I was a bit reluctant, but anyway. And then there's the website of Karuna Sechen. You can maybe put it in letters, but it's complicated to write. Then there's a session.org, which is for our monastery. And the book is Notebooks of a Wandering Monk. It's published by MIT Press. It's just coming out now. And so, probably it's possibly the last book of that kind I do. Now I want to go back to translation. So I think the full circle happened now. The main subject I wanted to deal with, like altruism, meditation, happiness, and dialogue with science. You cannot repeat itself endlessly. So I think it's a good way to end writing books and going back to contemplative life, to the hermitage, and to a little bit of photography, and then translation. And if I have a few more years to live, then, I'm so happy to continue like that. And my motto at the end is to transform myself to better serve others. So that's, I think, what keep on inspiring me. Yeah. Thank you for spending the time with this old monk.
The Wandering Monk. And I thank you to Helen for sending me the PDF version of your book before it was released. And you have plenty of time to recover from your 1,600 pages of PTSD. So you can rest and recover.
Thank you so much, Benoit.
Thanks so much, Matthieu.